Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the WhatsOnStage Podcast with me, Sarah Crompton. Alex Wood is off doing other things, but I am here in the heart of London's theatrical West End with Emily Vaughan-Barratt, who is a producer at Wessex Grove. Got loads of brilliant shows coming on, including All My Sons, which is about to open. But we're not here to talk about her shows, or at least not all the time. We're here to talk about a report that she has commissioned about women's health in theatre. And it is a riveting report, and she launched it last week and I was fascinated by it. So I grabbed her and said, let's record a podcast, even though she is quite pregnant. And so there is a small possibility that this podcast could be interrupted by a birth, but not much. Emily, you weren't pregnant when you commissioned this report, I presume, but pregnancy comes into it quite a lot, and women's health issues in general. Do you want to talk to me about why you commissioned it, why you wanted to investigate the whole issue of what it's like to work in theatre as a woman?
Yes, definitely. And thank you very much for having me on the podcast. And thank you for coming to the launch last week. So I started thinking about this 18 months ago, which well before I was pregnant. So it's been interesting to have sort of half of the process, nothing to do with this, and then half of the process, I have been growing a person inside me. The sort of very first moment that I realised that there was an issue that I felt I could be helpful in doing something about was on the first day of rehearsals in March last year for a musical we were doing. And one of the female actors in it came up to me, and I knew her a little bit because she'd been in a lot of the workshops. So I'd kind of built up a bit of a rapport with her over the last 2 years. And she said to me, I'm in perimenopause, I need you to know, and I need help with a few things in order for me to be able to do my job well and sing in this show. And the things that I was like delighted to be approached and have a conversation. The things that she needed were her own dressing room with a shower, because when her bleeding was very heavy, she might have to shower in the interval, and she needed kind of access to costume doubles kind of mid-show, not just between matinees and evening shows. And she also told me something very interesting about how her voice would change and how her singing range had altered because of it. So we did the first day of rehearsals in this kind of flurry of overexcitement, and you sing through the show. And when I got home that night, I kind of reflected on the conversation, and I was thinking, how are we living in a world where we haven't asked that question of the women that we're employing, especially due to the physicality of what they're doing? So I started talking to her a lot about her perimenopause, and we had a very open dialogue the whole time the show was happening. And she told me that one curtain call, she came on, she took her bow. When she came up from her bow, she didn't know where she was.
Wow. And
she was completely disorientated and very confused for about 5 seconds. And it's one of the scariest things that had ever happened to her. So by getting to know her, I kind of, my mum never really talked to me about her perimenopause or her menopause or anything. I think that's the case for a lot of, that's a generational issue where people kind of have suffered in silence. And I think people are less willing to suffer in silence. So I had that conversation with her. Then a friend of mine had a colleague who works in a West End office, had a miscarriage, came into work, still having a miscarriage because she'd used up all her sick days because of early pregnancy symptoms. And then I got diagnosed with PMDD, which is a kind of mental health disorder associated with your periods, which kind of gives you this horrible temporary depression for 2 days. And so all these things happened in the space of about 3 months. And I love producing theatre, and that's what my job and my vocation is, but I also feel very strongly about the women in this industry, and I have this kind of women's dinner every January where I get lots of women together and we have a big women theatre dinner. So I'm sort of slightly on this train of trying to gather women. And then that's where it's a very long-winded way of saying that's where it came from.
But it's really interesting because, in fact, I'm describing it as women's health in theatre, and that's what the report is called. In fact, it isn't really health as much as just being a woman in theatre. So the things that you have been investigating are the effects of really, really simple things that every woman goes through all her life, one way or the other. So menstruation, pregnancy, miscarriage, maybe trying to get pregnant, perimenopause and menopause. So they actually mark the arc of a woman's life, and yet they haven't been recognised as being different. And I thought it's so interesting that everybody has always just assumed that everybody would get on with it, however they were feeling.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think you're right. They are normal biological occurrences. But what makes it so different, I think, in this industry is the physical nature of it. And we've talked a lot about musical theatre performers in our focus groups and our research because of the dancing. The physical nature of working backstage, the hours, and for lots of people, the inflexibility. And so you can't work from home. If you are a freelance person working on a show, you can't be an actor and work from home. That goes without saying. And so lots of my friends who are, let's say they're a civil servant or they're a lawyer, if they're having egg freezing, they can tell their employer and they can take time off and work from home if they're feeling really rotten. It's just not an option for most people in theatre. And one of the saddest recurring stories that I've heard over the last 18 months is performers who want to get their eggs frozen, who wait until they have a gap and don't really ever get a gap because they keep working, and then they leave it too late and then they don't get the result they want because they're so frightened of missing out on work. Because really, if you're going through an egg freezing process, you need a month where you're not jumping about on a stage, and that isn't available to lots of people. Yeah. So that's one of the saddest things I keep hearing.
Yeah, and one of the saddest things, I thought, you did a brilliant launch for this report, which we'll talk about in a bit because it had very theatrical qualities about it. But the thing that broke my heart as well was the example that you gave of people having miscarriages and needing to recover and maybe still having the miscarriage, but feeling that they couldn't miss a night on stage. So you get into that whole idea with theatre, I guess, of doctor theatre and, the show must go on, and whatever you want, whatever's going on in your private life, you just have to get out there on stage. I mean, all of it's kind of sad and quite shocking, but that sense that theatre will heal you is acting against women's interests.
I think that's right, and I think there's also a kind of celebration of the stoicism and the stamina that comes with the show must go on. So I remember one of the very first shows I produced when I worked at ATG, which was The Pride. There was an actor in it who was so unwell that it was a male actor that we had a bucket side of stage, and I remember they had food poisoning, and it was, not to be graphic, both ends, but the celebration of that person managing to get through the show, using the bucket, keeping going, not putting the understudy on, everyone was just so delighted about it. And there's such a celebration of this stamina. And so I think we've fallen into a trap where that's how we feel we have to operate. And actually, if you are going through these things, your stamina is less. You do need to rest, you do need to have time off, and you do need to be able to know that there's support for that. And that's, I don't know, decades, centuries of as you say, doctor theatre, and the show must go on, and trying to find a way to allow people to not feel they're going to be fired or judged is quite hard in this environment.
Yeah. How did you actually do this study? What? Because it is a proper study. You've done a research project. You're not just saying it based on anecdotal experience. So how did you actually set up the study?
So I started with a committee of about 12 people who were ranging from agents, producers, directors, actors, company managers. And so we had a lot of meetings and sessions where we discussed the best way to extract information, and we talked a lot about all of their experiences. And just like so much great stuff came out of that, but mainly identifying what the problems were. One of my favourite stories that came up during that is an actor who'd had multiple miscarriages, this is like 20 years ago, who was frightened of telling her employer that she was pregnant and was having to smoke on stage. And so because she was so frightened of saying she was pregnant before 12 weeks because she's had so many miscarriages, she smoked what she definitely shouldn't. This is like, I think even maybe before they had herbal cigarettes. And she knew she was doing damage to her body and her baby, but she was too scared to say. So we had all these kind of interesting conversations across all the different topics. Then I did 3 very long, very detailed focus groups, one on menstruation, one on pregnancy, infertility and baby loss, and one on menopause. And I invited relevant people, and there were probably sort of 25 people in each group. And that is where the transcripts for the performance that we'll come to came from. And then I used all the stuff I'd learned from the focus groups to construct a survey, which was sent out kind of industry-wide. And then that's where I got some more detail, some more kind of narrative detail, and I got some statistics from it by just asking simple yes or no questions. So it was a kind of 3-stage, we've been doing it for, as I say, since the middle of last year. So that's how, and then Drew McConey, so I had 2 men on my committee who were both brilliant. They didn't want to make it. It's not an issue just for women to deal with. It's an issue for everyone to try to tackle. And so Drew came up with this way of helping me present the information. And so then the kind of final stage of the research project was working out how to get, we had 700 people there at the launch.
Which was at a theatre, which was at the Harold Pinter.
And it took us a while to work out how to deliver the information in an impactful way. And I don't know, you were there so you can say, I hope it felt impactful.
Yeah, it did. And it was a drama, wasn't it?
Yeah,
based on the testimony, with brilliant actors coming on stage and delivering the stories of the women that you had interviewed. And because Drew is a choreographer, it was choreographed to have a sense of a chorus line. So you would slowly get people coming on and reading their stories. And it was on the set of The Weir. And it was really impactful because it made you listen, like all theatre does, it made you listen very hard to these individual stories. I was interested too because you had very good actors like Sophie Melville and Liz Kingsman and Traciana Oberman and Nana Aguiegu Ampadu. But you also had men like Bryan Cranston and Pafa Essiedu and Nima Telegani. So you had this kind of mixture of voices and genders. And why did you take that decision? Because it was, to have the men on stage did make a difference.
Well, it originally came from a kind of offhand comment that Drew made to me, which is that he'd been reading an article about how men's voices penetrate. There are statistics and studies about how people listen to men's voices more, and basically audiences take in lower tone voices more than higher tone, and that is a kind of scientifically proven thing. So we were laughing about that, in the kind of continuing inequality of the world. And then as we were discussing wanting it to be a universal issue, I remember this, if anyone else listening is a Friends fan, there's that bit where they send Chandler to a one-woman show and it starts with her going, "My first period," and there's like 3 people in the audience. And it made me think of what people don't want is to be bashed over the head by women shouting about menstruation. And actually what we want to do by having men involved is by saying everyone can take responsibility for this. And if a man like Bryan Cranston can sit there and talk about these things, maybe that will make it easier for other men to listen or engage, rather than I don't want it to feel like women are cross with men because men haven't taken the time to educate themselves or listen, because actually there are a lot of very empathetic men in this industry. But we felt like it might make a more democratic delivery of information. And actually the men were so great.
They were brilliant.
They were really, really great, the 4 of them. And I was really thrilled, friends and colleagues of mine that came and did it for the morning just to be helpful. I think it made it also all the more heartbreaking because you very much understood it wasn't their story, but they were able to deliver it in an empathetic way. So that's why we decided to have women and men. And also I wanted people to talk to different ages. So having Lucy, who's 22, she was doing the story of someone who kept saying I'm 45, and I just didn't want it to become ageist either, because I think there's another issue for another podcast about ageism in this industry, which we do touch on a bit in the report about menopause. So that was why I decided to do it that way. Yeah. So
no, and it was brilliant, and it did make you listen differently. It made me think, actually, since this is a theatre podcast, it did make me think about the way that information is delivered, because, you know, I've worked journalistically all my life, and statistics are really hard to get over. And to have someone like James Norton or talk about, you know, miscarriage and do the emotion of it, so pause, because Ruby Thomas has written a script and there are pauses, and he stops and he says, sorry, I'm getting a bit emotional. And there's that minute where you think, is that him? Is he finding it hard to read this woman's story?
Yeah.
Or is it that the woman's story is so upsetting? Which it was. I think it was about, I think that was about IVF, that moment. And you just think, that's such a brilliant, that is why theatre is the best information deliverer
100%.
there is, because it just makes you listen in a completely different way and respond in a different way.
Well, and also I knew two things about asking actors to be involved which would be helpful. One was they would be able to deliver the information better than I would, because I'm not an actor and I'm not I don't live my life on stage trying to engage people. I try to support that happening. And second of all, speaking just truthfully, and so maybe a bit cynically, I knew I was going to have a better luck getting I wanted everyone in the industry to show up, and the Pinter was pretty much completely full on Thursday morning, and I knew that if I was able to present something theatrical and interesting, I was going to have a better chance of people showing up for an hour. Because when everyone's so busy, asking people to take an hour out of their day for something that isn't top of their priority list is hard. And I know, and I'm sure you know, sometimes a very busy diary, one's invited to lots of stuff that you can't go to. And I really, really wanted the decision makers in the industry to show up. And so as a commercial producer whose job is to try and get people to turn up to things, I was like, well, that is a way to do it, is to say it's going to be theatrical, and these are the people who you're going to get to see deliver the information. And that's why I was so grateful to all of those people that showed up, because they probably helped me get some audience along.
Yeah.
And as a result, I think we're going to be able to make more change because the Pinter was so full.
And it is interesting that, because one of the other, I will come on to statistics now, but one of the other things that really interested me was that I guess I thought it would be about actors. I guess I thought it would be about people on stage. But of course, all these issues affect all the people behind the scenes as well, whether they're stage managers, or agents who feel they can't take time off from representing people, even in the midst of a crisis, or producers or directors. I mean, that was the other impact for me, that it was so interesting to think of all those different people being affected by these issues.
Well, I found the agents bit of it really interesting. We had quite a lot of agents on our focus groups, and that's how they obviously made it into the sort of little play. And they all universally expressed this terrible guilt they have. And not just a guilt, but a fear that they go away for maternity leave particularly and come back and their clients have, you know, attached themselves to someone else, or they like someone else in the office more, or they've just or that relationship has been sort of, you know, diluted by having time off. And that and that was talked about a lot. And I found that really revealing, because I wouldn't have thought that. Yeah. And I think it's not an industry where a lot of people, there aren't that many senior women who talk about this very much. So and there's a little bit of me in the transcript, and one of the bits that I said is when we were producing Vanya and Andrew Scott went to New York, I just found out I was pregnant. So I found out I was pregnant the day before the Seagull opening at the Barbican. And then I had to go to New York 2 days later. And I went twice in my first trimester. And I didn't tell anyone that I was pregnant. My behaviour was, I felt so horrible. And I said to the team afterwards, like, after the first preview of Vanya, we were in a bar on Christopher Street where the Lucille Hotel is. And I was there and I was thinking, like, I've only found out I was pregnant 4 days ago. I've got no one to discuss this with. Should I be in this bar? I don't think so. Like, should I be at home? What should I be doing? Yeah. But because I'm in a position of responsibility, you're used to sort of leading the charge and let's all go out and celebrate. And someone makes a toast. I just didn't know how to handle it, and I just didn't really feel I had anybody to ask. And so it's been very interesting as if from an administrative point of view. It wasn't just about actors, it's about other people and how you adapt your behaviour in these situations.
Yeah, and maternity leave and pregnancy, I mean, that is such an obvious sort of rupture that you're, especially in those early stages, because one of the things that came out. So let's just do some of the headlines.
Yes.
I think it's 83% who felt that health issues had at some level affected them in theatre. And in their working practice. What are the sort of figures underneath that? What are the figures that surprised?
I think the split out
highlight
is really interesting. So when we then asked people if they were freelance or not, 95% of people who are freelance said they had never been aware of anything to support them with these issues. And then it's a significantly lower figure for people who are employed. So only 61%, not only 61%, but it is 61%, which means that there are at least 39% of people who work in offices around this square mile who are aware. And I think that's partly because if you work full time for some of the bigger organisations, they have really great policies. And I've read every single policy that anyone will send me from all the different theatre organisations. And so quite a lot of people, for example, if you work at the National or you work at ATG, which are the two probably biggest employers, they both have really good policies for full-time staff.
Right.
What I think we're all identifying, I've spent lots of time talking to heads of HRs in lots of different theatres and organisations, is that no small companies have anything. So now I'm going to be able to provide policies for everyone to have. So there should be no excuse now for anyone not to have it because I'm able to share these policies. And second of all, there's nothing for freelancers and no one does that. Even the big organisations, no one's worked out how to offer anything to freelancers. And I think, one of my ambitions was to try to say to people like I'm not asking people to spend money particularly because that's always tricky, is all I really want now is, having learned that 95% of freelancers have never been offered any support, is that people understand these issues exist and understand what they are a little bit more than they did before. And second of all, that we just ask people in advance, is there anything we can do to support you? And the best result for me would be if I sent a form out to someone who's going to be in one of our plays and they said, thank you very much for asking, just to let you know, I'm going through IVF. And so a couple of times during rehearsals, I might need to have time off. That would be an amazing result if someone felt they could actually ask for that. But then no one ever asks unless you ask them, because actors particularly, and stage managers and everyone who works backstage feel disposable. So they don't ask for anything because they feel that they're replaceable, and they're not. And so we must ask them. So that is the kind of... The freelancer statistic was just horrifying.
Yeah, really horrifying. And also what struck me was that some of the things are both expensive and complicated. Maternity leave is a complicated situation, though of course there is government support for it. And there are examples. I interviewed Samantha Barks for this podcast and she was on stage in Frozen, right through her pregnancy.
Yeah.
They adapted the costume. She then took a maternity leave. Her understudy was brilliant, went on, and then she went back into the part. So there are ways that you can manage pregnancy in a show. But I accept that maternity leave is a more complicated thing, and especially that timing issue. I had never really thought about that because, as you say, those first 12 weeks where you're not really telling anybody, and you're not really sure, you might want to take a job at that time, and then it's really more complicated, as the pregnancy progresses. But then there are some really simple, small things like problems of with perimenopause and menstruation, where you need costume changes, rooms to shower in.
And they're less visible than being pregnant.
And they're less visible than the pregnancy one. But they're actually also, it seemed to me, relatively simple. I mean, I may be speaking out of turn, but they seem relatively simple to solve.
They are simple to solve. And I think that's the thing, is that the learnings from the study, in a way, aren't that complicated. And the recommendations aren't that complicated because... the number of actors that have now told me, for example, that they take their show underwear home to wash when they're on their period, or because they're embarrassed about if they've had a leak or something like that. I mean, that's such an easy fix, like put a plastic bag with it, or let's provide period pants backstage. There's such small things, but like nobody should be getting on the Northern Line with their show pants and taking them home and washing them overnight. That's not a dignified way to have to behave at work. So a lot, as you say, a lot of it is very small.
And costume changes for people with perimenopause and menopause, that was really interesting to me, that idea that, you know, you might just need another costume because you will sweat more or whatever.
Yeah, you might want to come off, and if you've got 5 minutes but you're still wearing the same costume, just change, because also being under stage lights is so sweaty. And so if you're already in a phase of your life where you happen to be having hot flushes and you're sweating, it can be really, really unbearable. And so that's another really easy solve. And then there's a whole dressing room issue about just making sure that people are in the right dressing rooms with the right facilities. And there's all, you know, as producers, we always have this kind of chaos of only 2 dressing rooms have got showers and people have got to share. And, you know, you're in a constant negotiation about it. But actually, just asking people for their practical needs as opposed to their emotional needs, like, you know, not, I mean, the emotional needs are important too, but, you know, what do you actually need?
It's a help. And I was very struck because I've just been, for the past year, I've just been working on this book called Intimacy, which I was the ghostwriter on. And it's written by Ita Manley-O'Brien, who is the leading intimacy coordinator on screen and stage. And she does a lot of work. And one of the things that I found the writing of that book a completely revelatory process at many levels.
Yeah, bam.
Because one of the things, again, is that it's embarrassment. So her basic things for starting off are that clear communication at the start, and then consent, i.e. setting in place boundaries and requirements. Then actually things can progress really quite smoothly from then on in. But the initial embarrassment, which, you know, stops people talking about bloody pants or, you know, that they're not feeling very well, or, you know, premenstrual depression and disorders, just stops any conversation really happening. And then everybody finds that they're in danger of having a bad time as a result of that lack of clarity at the start.
And I think one of the interesting things about the intimacy conversation and where it's relevant and very similar to the women's health issues is you will meet people who are resistant, who will either say, oh, come on, women have been having periods forever and menopause forever, what's the big deal? In the same way that some of the actors we deal with, I'm interested to know if you cover this in your book, don't want intimacy coordinators in the room. You know, oh, we've been doing this forever. Why do I need someone if I'm going to have a kiss? I'm at work, and don't understand and are resistant, therefore, and don't understand why trying to be progressive and democratic and equitable and fair and safe about the way you work is actually just better for everybody, and the quality of the work will go up if people feel safe. So I think it's interestingly some women who have said to me, oh, you know, my menopause was fine. Like, I think people are fine, you know, and not many, but I have had some comments like that. And certainly with intimacy, there's a lot of that. But it's like what we do on the first day of rehearsals. We read the anti-bullying policy, the sexual harassment policy, the equity safe space policy. It's just about like being upfront and starting it so that everyone knows where you are, as you say. But they are very similar. And actually intimacy came up a lot in the focus groups, because sometimes when people have racy scenes on stage and they're in underwear, they don't want to wear that underwear, that costume at certain times of the month or at certain times of their life. And I've heard many, many stories about directors telling actors, just carry on, you can't change your costume, we can't change the blocking. And I'm hoping that intimacy coordinators are helping with that problem as well.
Yeah, I think they very much are. I mean, certainly Ita talks about that a lot, and about being able to accommodate different changes of clothing for different times of life and of month. And I think too that you're absolutely right that there is a resistance to the idea of talking about it, and that was part of the revelation for me. I think intimacy is slightly different because you've obviously got that idea that if you're suddenly making it into a choreographed scene, then it's safer anyway, and that you can deal with a lot of emotional issues so that people can be very clear about what they are and are not there to do. And I think I would say, having worked with Ita, obviously, that it does make a huge difference, and it makes the sex sexier quite often.
100%, because there's
no embarrassment and the
around
shame
it.
out of it.
100%.
But clothing constantly comes up as an issue, and I think that is so interesting that you can wear different things and they make you feel different and safer and better if you are feeling any of these vulnerable things, that because your body's changing all the time. And I
100%. I think it's a really, and also I think you don't know what you don't know. So until I had this experience of talking to this actor about perimenopause, my knowledge about it was very limited. And until I had friends going through IVF and egg freezing, I haven't had any fertility treatment, touch wood, to date. But until my friends have been going through it, and I've been really living with them the day by day, injections, bloating, all that sort of stuff, I didn't... Some crazy...
Yeah, we suddenly have loud music from outside.
Crazy... Working on Charing Cross Road is an amazing place, but also you do get a lot of crazy music out there. But until you've had first-hand experience of it yourself, or someone's really explained it to you, you don't know what you don't know. So I've learned so much over the last 18 months about the process of IVF and why it affects people on stage in a way that certainly 5 years ago I wasn't aware of. So another of my ambitions is to try to, by opening up the conversation, is to try to make it... I'm hoping that for those 700 people that were in the room on Thursday, I've had loads of messages from people saying, oh, I walked out of the theatre with someone who I've known for 20 years and we'd never talked about our menopause, and we talked about it walking back to the office. And so I'm hoping that if we could just open the conversation a bit, it'd be much easier for someone to say, it's happening again, the rickshaws are back.
Don't like the word menopause. They just
yeah.
Classic.
They hate. So that would be, that would be a great result as well. That by taking the shame and the embarrassment out of it and talking about it a little bit, it might be easier for people to say, I don't want to wear that. I can't wear that costume.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing is, most people who work in wardrobe on the whole are women.
Yes.
And one of the great heroes of my research project has been wardrobe departments.
Right.
Because they are the people who are quietly...
Exactly.
Doing all this work to support all these actors. And I think they're amazing. And,
Yeah, that also came out in the book, how very often it was the wardrobe people that everybody talked to. And they were they were not just they're providing clothing, they were providing counselling, support, all those things.
Wardrobe department shoulder
brilliant.
A lot.
They are amazing people.
Yeah, they really
are. I'm very fond of wardrobe department. And also, I did think that it was so fascinating. The thing I brought out was the thing about IVF, actually. So in a way, I felt that was the thing I hadn't ever thought of.
Yeah.
A lot of people now have IVF treatment.
Yeah.
And that affects your life in ways that you really don't know about unless you are going through it.
Yeah, and and also women who are going through IVF on the whole feel that their body has failed them and they're not able to naturally biologically reproduce, and that as a woman, for nearly everyone I've spoken to, feels that they feel like a failure and they feel embarrassed by the process, so they don't talk about it. And then you find out when they're pregnant and everything's gone well, oh, it was from IVF. And actually, interestingly, having James Norton being one of the actors reading, he made this amazing movie, I don't know if you've seen, with Bill Nighy, called Joy, which is about the first IVF baby, which I think is just the most beautiful movie, and I just cried the whole way through it because it was just so lovely. Because IVF was invented by a British scientist. Yeah. Or 3 British scientists, so it's a homegrown thing, but there's so much embarrassment around it, and I'm sad about that because there's lots of reasons why people suffer from infertility, and none of it's ever really your fault.
No, and again, it's the talking, isn't it? It's just the feeling that you're not embarrassed to say something and to ask, and to have theatres in a position where they will just respond. Also without embarrassment.
Yeah, 100%. And also with sympathy, if people are going through IVF and that cycle doesn't work and they're going on to the next one, just empathy and sympathy for people in a situation that's different to yourself. And actually, it's just so much easier to be empathetic if you know even just 1 or 2% about it more than you did before. And so it is... hopefully by having done the event and sort of circulating all this stuff, people might just have a little bit more knowledge. Because knowledge equals empathy, I think, anyway.
I think it does. And it's right that theatre should do it. We've really running out of time, but just tell me what you're excited about that Wessex Grove is producing rather than than your own small production.
My own small, well, it's interesting timing because what date are we now? October the 13th. And so I'll be having a baby sometime in the next month. And we have 4 very exciting shows coming up, none of which I'm really going to get to sort of properly see up, which I'm quite sad about. But I have 2 excellent business partners who are great and a great team here. So I'm very excited about bringing O'Mary over. So we're the kind of UK executive producers and general managers for O'Mary. And I saw it downtown in New York and I just loved it so much, and I campaigned very hard for us to look after it here because I just think it's joyful and hilarious and so well crafted. So then we start rehearsals for that in 3 weeks.
Brilliant.
All My Sons, which is our 3rd show we're doing with Ivo van Hove. We have a lovely working relationship with him. That starts rehearsals on tomorrow.
Gosh, yeah.
And
best Miller play, I think, underproduced. So I'm very glad you're doing it.
Yeah, and
so
also
it was a real cracker.
He has a great relationship with Miller, not personally, but with the text of Miller, and he's very excited. And obviously, it's reuniting him and Bryan Cranston, which is exciting for them after their success of Network. So that's exciting stuff. So I'm at least going to get to that read through tomorrow if I don't go into labour this evening, and then. We're doing Woman in Mind with Sheridan Smith, who we worked with last year, who I loved working with. And Ramesh Ranganathan's joining her. It's his stage debut.
So exciting, yeah.
And Mike Longhurst and I did this audition with him that we really had no idea how it was going to go, and it was just perfect and hilarious. So that's fun too.
Another cracking play, very nice.
Yeah, great.
One's coming back.
Oh, so fun.
Yeah.
And then the last one, which we're doing in this kind of season of work, is Teeth and Smiles, which is a play that David Hare wrote 50 years ago, what Helen Mirren did. The Rebecca Lucy Taylor, my hero, Self-Esteem, will be directed by my old friend Dan Raggett. And what's so cool about that is it's about a band, but she is rewriting some of the music. So we're going to get to hear her music in this in this David Hare play that's 50 years old. So David Hare and I went to her Brixton Academy gig on Friday.
That's cool.
And I turned to him during it and said, she wasn't even born when you wrote that play. How cool is that? And he's like bopping along at Brixton with all the 30-year-old women having the time of his life. And so I'm really excited about that. So those are the things that we've got coming up, and I love all of them. And I will try my best to, make sure I see them all. But I will be all being well, I will be at home trying to raise another person.
Having a lovely time, I hope. So
thank you.
Thank you, Emily, for making time to talk to us.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you so
much
much
my office.
for talking us through what I know is a really good initiative about raising the issue of women's health.
And just the beginning, I hope. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's it for this week's episode, but please remember to subscribe, send questions wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll be back next week with a smattering of bonus episodes in between.